So we're starting a new series with cars that come in the shop, and for this first one, we're gonna do a DIY on how to do a radiator on a 2008 BMW 328i. It's a pretty simple DIY. I think anybody can do it at home with some basic hand tools. It's really easy on these N52 naturally aspirated motors. The only thing is, and we'll link it, if you have an N51, there's a special radiator that you have to use, so do make sure you research before you buy the appropriate radiators because you cannot mix either one. But other than that, it's pretty simple. We'll detail some of the symptoms, what you'll need to replace, what we would recommend replacing, and the tools you would need. And should probably take you about an hour or so from start to finish, depending on how quickly you go or if you get stuck. But nevertheless, we'll show how to do it and we'll go from there. So before you even start working on any car in general, it doesn't matter if it's BMW, always make sure the hood is safely propped up. I actually have one that actually goes here that locks it, but it's actually being used on this M3 over here, so we'll go ahead and use this hood prop. You can use a stick, whatever it is, just make sure it's in a spot firmly mounted, so that way you don't have this thing come crashing down on your head, because I've had that too many times. Now that we know this is safe, we'll go ahead and start removing all these panels to get it out of the way. The airbags will have to come out, and then we'll rack it and start draining the coolant. It's advisable, I'd recommend putting the car on jack stands so you can get underneath and drain the coolant. You could probably just, let it spill out, but I wouldn't advise it. It's, bad practice, but you do what you want to do. So we're gonna get started. 2 T20 bits, sometimes they're screws. Go ahead and remove them. Get this ducting out of the way so we get some more room. Just lifts out of the way. Can't get any more simpler than that. Also, a magnetic tray helps a lot. Organize your stuff. Next, I'm gonna remove this air box. There's usually 2 10s here that hold it, but this one's all garbage, so you remove 2 10s. There's a worm clamp here that you can use with a flathead, and then there's a MAF sensor over here that you have to unclip. So once you get that out of the way, then you can go ahead and lift this out. It's a pretty big screwdriver. Next, we're gonna go ahead and remove this radiator fan. It's really simple on these N52s. You've got a connector, you've got a T25 bolt that's right over here where my finger is, and if I shine a light, I'll be able to see it better. Right here, you'll be removing that. And then there's gonna be some tabs down here that you'll have to pry that will unlock the radiator from its mounts. And then, since this is a manual transmission version, it actually doesn't have a transmission cooler, but if yours is an automatic, there's definitely a transmission cooler down on the left side that you'll have to get underneath and remove a T25 screw. Otherwise, you won't be able to lift the radiator fan out. So do make sure, if you do have an automatic transmission version, make sure to remove that T25 before you lift it out so you don't damage those hoses. But since this is a manual, it doesn't have it. But let's go ahead and get started and remove this. Over here. Clips. T25 right here. It's a little tough to see, but there's a clip here, down here on this left side, that you have to kind of push back and then lift the radiator up and it'll come out. Kind of just like that. So now the radiator is loose. Go ahead and lift it out. You do be careful with this line. Try not to bend it too much so that way you don't damage it. though sometimes it is a little unavoidable. If it's old and brittle, it will snap. So that's why I recommend having a new one on hand before you start this, so you don't get stuck. Just like that. I have to admit, the manual transmission one is a lot easier to remove than the automatic one. So if you're struggling, just make sure you've unlocked all your connectors, you've disconnected all the lines, you disconnected the automatic transmission cooler from the bottom, and just kind of wiggle it in a motion like this, kind of like moving it up and down, and it'll eventually come out. Just don't force it out because you may break some stuff on the way up. So just a quick tip. So now that we got the radiator fan out, we're gonna go ahead and go up, remove the under panels, and go ahead and drain the coolant. Before you do so, make sure you remove the radiator cap from the reservoir. It makes emptying the system a lot quicker. Now we're underneath the car. We're gonna go ahead and just remove all these 8mm fasteners all on this under panel so we can get it out of the way so we can drain the coolant. There's quite a few that you'll have to remove. Namely, there's gonna be like ones here, here. There's gonna be a couple in the front, here and here. There's some in the middle. There's gonna be some back here a little hidden, and they go all the way back here. So you do have to like look for them, but just make sure you get all of them out, and then you'll be able to slide it back in out of the way. We're using a lift, so we're kind of cheating, but yeah, same principle applies for the guys at home. Make sure you use the jack pads and everything. There's a center jack point in the middle and in the back on the differential, so just jack it up safely if you're gonna bring the car up. So as you can see, there's a little bit of like coolant residue kind of over here, so and you can kind of tell right here on the corner of the radiator, it's actually weeping. So this radiator is only 4 years old and it's already busted, so it's kind of shitty, but it is what it is. I removed the front cover panel here that covers all this area. Some radiators will have different locations for drain plugs. Sometimes they have them over here on the right side. This one so happens to have it on the left, and it happens to be a 19mm as well, so we'll just go ahead and crack it loose. Do know it is probably going to slash everywhere, so just make sure you're wearing like old clothes and nothing like Gucci, Louis Vuitton, or whatever it is. I would hope you wouldn't be, but collect it in an approved collection container. Yeah, make sure you do this when the car's cooled down. Don't do it when it's hot. Wow, does this thing have no coolant? Very little came out. I think we're gonna have to do it from here.
Low radiator.
Yeah, that's a splash zone, so a lot of DIY show you like, oh, just remove this radiator hose and magically it's off, and then you're like struggling and cursing at the video. Yeah, we get that. That wasn't the most fun. It was a little tough. So now that we've gotten the whole radiator and cooling system drained, we're going to go back down and loosen up some bolts that hold on the radiator. There's nothing else you have to do down here. The actual radiator slips into the radiator support from the top, and once you do that, then it'll come out. So we'll show you how to do that right now. So now we're going to remove the upper radiator hose. Just got to undo the clip there and kind of gently get somewhere where we can pry it. Again, these do get somewhat stuck if they haven't been removed in a very long time, so just kind of gently work your way. So now there's going to be 2 additional bolts here, a T25 here, and there's going to be one kind of hidden over here. You're just going to remove both of those, and then you'll be able to free the radiator from its bracket. We got everything free. Let's get this over there. Probably going to spill a little bit of coolant, but it's okay. Now, you should be able to wiggle the radiator free. If it doesn't come out easy, make sure you just double check everything so that way you don't miss any clips or hoses, just like that. So just to be, you know, clear, just in case if you get a radiator where you actually have to swap out some plugs on the bottom. For instance, this is a manual transmission 328i, and this particular radiator manufacturer requires you to swap out a couple of plugs on the bottom, which would be here and here, with depending on your application, a long or a short plug. I guess from the factory, on the left side, they come with a long plug for an automatic transmission car that would have the transmission cooler hoses right here. But since we have a manual transmission 328i, that's not the case. So they're having us swap out this entire bottom housing for a short one that comes in the packaging. So that way we block off this connection and we don't have any leaks. And it's the same thing on this side. This side comes with a short plug for not having the aftercooler is what they call, and it's applicable in this case for this car because it doesn't actually have a hose that goes through this. But if you had to take a hose off, a coolant hose off on this side of the radiator, then that means you have the aftercooler, and you would have to swap this out with a longer piece that comes in the packaging. So do make sure that you swap out the applicable pieces before you put the radiator back in the car if you have to. Otherwise you may have leaks once you start filling the system, or you may actually have no coolant flow if you improperly don't swap them out. So be sure to check the box if you have any different plugs before you put this in, and make sure you get that all done, because it won't be fun doing this in the car if you forget to do it. So we're making sure that we swapped everything out for the manual transmission version, and it's ready to go back in the car. Installation is simply the reverse of the disassembly. Just gotta feed it back into the car. So be very careful not to snag on anything. Just watch your step as you go. Got a radiator hose down here, giving us a little bit of a hard time. And the trick with this is to kind of get the bottom in first at an angle. You'll see where it's gonna slide in into the slot, and then you get the top in. So you're gonna have to play with the radiator as you slide into its appropriate slot, and then you can kind of finalize everything. So once you got the radiator in, you want to take a look and just kind of look from the top down to see if the radiator is sticking farther out on one particular side or not. You'll know when it's fully in when you have the slots down here resting up against the tabs in the radiator support, and the radiator is pretty much fully flush with the mounting holes that you took out those screws earlier. Once you know that for sure is good to go, then you can go ahead and put your screws back in. If you're not replacing the radiator hoses, go ahead and click those back in and put the fan back on, and that's pretty much it. Now that we have the radiator fully secured, it's in the mounting tabs at the bottom, 2 bolts, T25 bolts are back in. Again, time would be to replace your radiator hoses, make sure all your connections to either the transmission cooler and the aftercooler are all clicked in, and then just finalize everything before you carry on and putting the radiator fan and button and everything up. I usually recommend getting at this point, once you have all the hoses clicked back together, to start filling the system just to make sure that you don't have any leaks. That way you don't have, if you do happen to have a leak, you can kind of disassemble everything pretty quickly rather than putting everything together then realizing that you do have a leak. So just make sure you do your quality check now before you continue any further. We got the new radiator hoses in, new line, new lower radiator hose, cleaned up everything, checked for leaks, and everything's good. So now what's left is to put the radiator fan. Same thing as before. I want to kind of just slide it in and wiggle it in without having to snag on any of the cables or coolant pipes. And patience is key here. Don't want to rush it too fast. If you're getting caught up on something, kind of slow down and kind of watch your pace. But you just gotta slide it like so, without making sure it doesn't get caught on anything. In and do note those two sliders that go into the radiator for the fan. So, and that's it. So here you've got a slider lock mechanism on this side. You also have a mechanism right here on the top that locks the fan into place, and then you got one here on the far end. It doesn't have a lock, but it's kind of a guide that allows the fan to sit in securely. Since this is a manual transmission, that's pretty much it. The only thing left we need to do is just put this guy on and our radiator fan power cable. If this was an automatic transmission and 52, then this is where you would go back underneath and put in that T25 screw that you took out in the beginning back onto the radiator shroud, so that way you can hold the cooler. And then that's pretty much it. So that really wraps up the radiator install for the most part. The only thing left is to fill the coolant reservoir with your 50-50 mixed coolant, and also bleed in the system. And the way I do that is to have a battery jumper on the car, and I hit the gas pedal for 10 seconds with the heater on full blast, and it will run the water pump for about 12 minutes to evacuate all of any air bubbles from the system. And then after that, you're pretty much ready to go. So we'll go ahead and do that and wrap this job up. We're gonna start bleeding the cooling system, and in order to do so, if you don't have the factory scanner or any scanner to begin with, what you'll need to do is set the heater on full temp, fan speed on low, move the heat ventilation setting over to the red, and make sure you have some sort of battery tender because it does run for about 12 minutes. You'll hold the accelerator for 10 seconds and you should hear the electronic water pump start moving water, as you can hear. So if we go look at the coolant reservoir, you'll see water moving inside of it. And if all else is good, you just go ahead and put your under trays back on and let this process do its thing. Like I said, it's about 12 minutes, so just keep an eye on the coolant levels, and you'll know when it's finished when you no longer hear water rushing through the reservoir. So that pretty much wraps up the radiator install on this manual 2008 through 28i. Pretty similar to the automatic cars, so just a little variances here and there, nothing too different. Hopefully this video helped you guys a lot. If you have any other questions, you can always leave them in the comment section and we'll get back to you. And also let us know what other DIY you might want to see in the future, or anything in particular that you want to see. We'll try to cover it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we appreciate you guys, all the love that you guys send our way, you know, keeping the business going, and also, you know, just watching the content. So don't forget to like, rate, comment, subscribe on the channel, and just make sure that you always stay up to date on our new projects that are coming up, because we've got some pretty exciting content coming up, and I don't think you guys are gonna want to miss it. I keep saying that, but it's really happening. There's some really cool stuff in the works. So that's it for today. So we'll catch you on the next video.